Islets represents everything I love about indie gaming. It's the made-up story about a fantastical world when you're a child, or the sketch of a dream. It's a classic metroidvania that's been lovingly crafted by two brothers, with Kyle Thomas doing all of the art, the coding, and everything else involved, but his brother Eric crafting a fantastic soundtrack. Truly, Islets is the epitome of an indie game, the best of which make up the foundations of SwitchUp, and it puts a big grin on my face to say the game's really, really good. Why exactly? Well, let's find out. Aiko is a young warrior in a world literally divided. The once majestic island was held together with large magnets, which over time became degraded, and as a result the island itself split into several pieces. These pieces make up the many maps of the game Islet, and it's up to you, as so many other warriors have attempted, to try and reunite them. The narrative is incredibly wholesome and is divided through traditional storytelling means such as text-based cutscenes or interactions with some of the other inhabitants of this world, but also quirky touches like being able to pay for a mailbox, which will see letters delivered to you relating to what you're currently up to. It's absolutely charming, even down to one of the main antagonists, for want of a better word, being called Snoot and always trying to outdo you, never quite believing that you could possibly have achieved any of the things you have. There's some really clever aspects to the gameplay, but let's begin with the familiar. As with most Metroidvanias, you'll start out in a small section of one of the islands. Initially, you can move left and right, you have a simple jump and a basic attack move. Your repertoire of skills quickly expands as you explore the islands and defeat the many bosses. Soon you'll be double jumping, running up walls, and slamming down to break through into new areas. There's also an incredibly useful dodge move, which enables you to avoid any damage. This becomes essential for defeating some of the trickier boss fights. With a mixture of combat and platforming, Islets is a very accessible Metroidvania. That's not to say it's easy, but it definitely doesn't carry the difficulty levels that you'd find in something like Hollow Knight, and with this style I'd say that's to its benefit. Accompanying your sword, you'll also have a spirit bow. Performing damage on enemies will replenish this, and while combat with the normal enemies is relatively straightforward, the only way you can heal is through reaching the shrine checkpoints, or later in the game through the teleportation gates, once you have the prerequisite perk. I initially wasn't sure about this, but the checkpoints are placed in such a way that you can always reach the next one. And upon speaking to Kyle, there was real intent behind this, with very careful placement of the shrines, ensuring a good level of challenge, but not too much between each of them. And when you're facing one of the multitude of bosses, you're never more than a hop, skip and a jump away from them so that you can try again if needed. And these are really well designed. In fact, not only do you fight bosses while on the islands, there are those you'll face while on your airship, but we'll go into that in a little bit. As with any good Metroidvania, Islets is jam-packed full of secrets. There are hidden walls, secret platforming segments, as well as timed skill segments moving across these many colours. Most hidden areas will reward you with a skill upgrade. These offer 3 random rewards. Some may be simply more of the game's currency, but there are also things like exploding arrows on impact, or an increased climbing speed. I think it was a really good gameplay choice. Rather than simply rewarding players with currency, some of the permanent skill unlocks make these more tricky platforming sections a much more enticing proposition. The main aim of the game here is to reunite those islands, and once you reach the magnet and repair it on each of them, they'll gradually connect back together. And this is where we jump back to what I said previously about the airship. At the edge of each of these islands, you can jump onto your dinky little airship and head out to an overworld area. From here again you'll have a map which shows each of the islets that you've uncovered. If you die, this is also where you'll return to the small medical tent, and there are 2 shops here as well as your mailbox. You can buy permanent upgrades from these shops, and if you can find the different ship parts, you can even upgrade your vessel, adding guns onto it, which you'll use to reach both new areas and also fight against new bosses. And the aerial combat is a stroke of genius. It completely changes up the combat, making it feel a bit more like a bullet hell shooter, but your bullets have an auto lock-on, which again was a really sensible choice, leaving you the simple task of dodging a couple of bullets. Now each island has its own task, and there are times where you'll have to move back and forward between them before you can actually complete them to connect. If you find yourself lost, there's a character who you can pay a small amount to get the next destination. This small inclusion removes my biggest gripe with most Metroidvanias, that of walking around like a headless chicken. And if you don't want to use it, well, you don't have to. The level design is mostly strong, and revisiting old areas with new skills will more often than not garner you some secrets or hidden items. What initially felt like a very by-the-numbers Metroidvania ended up really impressing me, as you reconnect those islands and the map grows, allowing you new routes and access between them. When you combine that as well with the tight controls and really quite excellent platforming segments, it's just a really fun game to play. Yes, you could critique the game in terms of some of its level design being simplistic and some of the enemy AI and pathfinding leaves a little to be desired, but as a reflection of the passion and dedication that comes from two brothers working together at the cost of everything else in the hopes that they can create something special, well, I think they've succeeded. Gameplay for me scores 17 out of 20. The controls also score 17 out of 20. I enjoyed the artistic direction that they've gone for here. It certainly adds to the light-hearted feel of the game, and it's all squeezed into just 542 megabytes. I did feel like the main character's running animation could have used a little bit of work. He feels just a touch too upright, but I do like the way you spin when you double jump. But the same critique could be levelled at some of the animations of your enemies. Now, boss designs were generally quite impressive. Each of them has their own movesets, but it's the careful unison between the excellent soundtrack and the charming visuals which combine to make the overall flavour that Islets gives. Weaker areas include some of the sound effects and a couple of bugs. Now, one bug I experienced saw me defeating an enemy off the screen, and I couldn't complete the gated section. These segments generally see the doors closing on each side, a la Guacamelee, and you have to kill all the enemies before you can move on. It was only really a minor thing in the grand scheme of things, and through the menu you can jump back to the last shrine. Another minor quirk was one boss fight where one of his attacks didn't show on the screen, which made for a particularly challenging fight. I got there in the end, but man, it was difficult. Frame rates are very consistent and the game feels silky to control, and it looks great in both docked or handheld modes. There are no issues with text size here, just a few little bugs that need ironing out that in a game of this scale doesn't really surprise me. My only other minor visual critique, some of the more uniformly rectangular stages that also may have benefited from a few more scenery items. There are a few destructible pots, but generally that's it. Still very impressive overall and some nice little details. Visuals and performance combined score 16 out of 20, while music and audio score 18 out of 20. Finally then, that takes us on to value. Islets is going to set you back £15.49 or your regional equivalent, which feels like a reasonable price, but I'm always drawn back to the £10.99 Hollow Knight. If that's the A-star standard, then I think we can say Islets is about a B+ in terms of value. The structure of the game is incredibly enjoyable. Unlike Hollow Knight, I'm not getting lost every 5 minutes, and it feels very accessible in terms of its combat. With the amount of extra secrets and things to find, I think you could easily spend 15 to 20 hours here, but you could also do it much faster if you really sped your way through and knew exactly where to go. When all said and done, I would still give value 16 out of 20. So there we have it, the true epitome of an indie game, and one done well. I for one wish these guys every success. Islets is a really enjoyable Metroidvania that's both accessible to existing fans of the genre, or for those who have traditionally found the barrier to entry to be a bit too steep. It gets a SwitchUp score of 84%. Thanks to those guys for the review copy, it's been an absolute blast. Let me know what you think of this one in the comments. We've also got the game Hack, which is another Metroidvania, and we're hoping to get the review of that one over to you tomorrow. As always, if you want to save 10% on any of these games and you're in the EU or US regions, just use code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg to buy your eShop credit. If you enjoy the video, tickle all the buttons, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!